Hello everyone, and welcome to this, my first of two videos on the Nikon FG-20. For those of you who learn better through reading, this is the cover of the book that I wrote about the FG-20. This is a really nice compact way that you can just toss the information about this camera into your backpack or your camera case and take it with you for quick and easy reference. There's a link in the video's description to my Amazon author page, and that's where you can find this book and others that I've written about the cameras on this channel. The Nikon FG-20 is an interchangeable lens 35mm camera. What does that mean? It means it can take any 35mm film. It means that the lenses can be taken off of the camera and a different one can be put back on at any point when you're not taking a photo without affecting the rest of your film. There we go. It also means it has a single lens. The light for the photo travels through the lens to a mirror behind the lens, up to a prism here, and out to the viewfinder in the back. And you can see approximately what is going to be on your photo until the moment that you take the picture. The camera uses a center-weighted meter, and what that means is that in the center of the image, an area about like that, that's the majority of the metering information, and then the rest of it, the rest of the focusing screen that you look through in the viewfinder represents the minority of the metering information. And if you have your Nikon FG-20 and you look through the viewfinder right now, there's a circle, the outside largest circle in the viewfinder. That's the perimeter for that central area of metering, and that represents 60% of the metering data. The balance of the focusing screen is 40% of the metering data. The shutter speeds range from 1 second to 1/1000th, as well as there's a bulb shutter speed and an A and a noise, and we'll talk about what all of those are because this is a multi-mode camera, so you can shoot it in automatic mode, and we'll discuss that at length in the second video. The camera's viewfinder is right here, and that gives you 85% or 0.85x magnification with 92% frame coverage. Now here's a graphic that shows you what that looks like, but basically what it means is when you look through the viewfinder, what you see in the viewfinder is going to be 85% of the size of the of what's going to be on the negative, and the 92% means that you're going to get a little bit more image on your negative than in your viewfinder. So let's pretend that what you're looking at right now represents what's going to be on the negative. 92% frame coverage means that approximately 4% on each side in the top and bottom will be on your film, but not in your viewfinder, so you have a little bit of room to crop your final image if your camera's maybe just a bit crooked when you take the photo. One of the very nice things about the FG-20 is that the focusing screen, which is inside of the camera, and I'll show you where that is right now. If you take your lens off, you can see inside of the shutter box, there's a focusing screen right there that we're looking at. That's fixed, you cannot take it out, but it is the same focusing screen used in the Nikon FE. It's called the K2 focusing screen, and it's it was at the time, if not Nikon's most popular, then one of their most popular focusing screens. It is really a very nice focusing screen to use. One last note about this camera, the flash sync speed on it is 1/60th of a second, and that's marked by a red 60 on the shutter speed dial. That's the fastest speed at which you can use the flash on this camera, and in the second video I'll explain why that is. The target market for the Nikon FG-20 was the entry-level user, and we know this because it had a slightly lower quality of build than, say, the FM, the FE, and the cameras that were out at the time, and also this was had fewer bells and whistles on it than some of those other ones did. That said, it's still an incredibly capable camera, and it can do 99.9% of what most any photographer would ever want to do with it, and it's a really good camera for a first or only film camera. It does have some really nice features like that K2 focusing screen we talked about. It has a really fantastic light meter display. I love the way that the light meter in this camera works a lot. And also, given the camera's size and target market, the viewfinder in this camera is really nice. It's very bright. It gives you a really good image size and does not crop very much out of the image. So those are all really good benefits to this camera. And also, despite being an entry-level camera, it has some really nice functional features like exposure value compensation. We're going to talk about that in the second video and why that's important and how to use it. And it also has a mechanical shutter release for bulb and M90, which are up here on the shutter dial, bulb and M90, so that if your batteries die or you forget to put them in or something, you can still use this camera, albeit in a slightly limited capacity. And lastly, just as a matter of personal opinion, I think the FG-20 is one of the Nikon unsung heroes of the film era because it is really a delightful camera to use, and I think it gets a little bit worse of a rap than it probably deserves to because it's considered an entry-level basic camera. But really, there is nothing that on this camera that I sit around and think maybe a PC port for the flash would be nice, but there's nothing else that really this camera's lacking that a camera needs. The FG-20 was made by Nikon. Now they're called Nikon Corporation. At the time they were called Nippon Kogaku KK in Tokyo from 1984 until 1986. Now if you have your Nikon FG-20, we'll take a look here and go through all of the different features and functions on it, and we're going to start with the stuff on the top, although technically on the front these are the strap lugs, and if you don't have split rings, just any old round split ring will do, and this is where you connect your camera strap so you can hang it around your neck. Over here on this side we have the film rewind knob and lever, as well as film back release. There we go. This is your film speed dial. If you lift up the outer ring, you can adjust this to adjust your film speed. Super simple to do. The ring itself does not otherwise turn. If you've used an FG, which was the predecessor to this, then you'll notice that there was a little bit of a difference in the interface here. This does not have the exposure value compensation that the FG had, which is fine, because I'm going to show you how using the ISO ring for exposure value compensation is exactly the same as having an EV dial. This little symbol right here indicates your film plane indicator for things like high magnification microscopy. This is your flash hot shoe, and this flash hot shoe has two connections here. One of these is a ground, I think it's this one, and this one communicates with the camera so that the camera will display a light in the viewfinder when the flash is ready to fire. At least I think it does. I just looked through the viewfinder right there, and I can't see where that light would be. I thought I had that in my notes. Oh, there it is. Haha. Yeah, when we get into the second video, I'll show you how to find the light to indicate when the flash is ready, but that's what that contact does. Okay, moving on. This is your film advance lever right here. After you take a photo, you use it to advance the film. That is just indicates Nikon. This is an index to let you know what shutter speed you've selected with the shutter dial, which I'm moving right here. And this is your automatic mode lock release. So if we switch into auto mode, I can't change it unless I push the lock release, and now I can switch into auto mode with annoying beep. That's the official name of that mode. Not really. Anyway, in order to get out of either of those modes, I have to push the lock release down, and now I can get into the manual shutter speed selection. This is your shutter speed dial, and there's, shutter button right here, shutter release. And with this also, it has a little threaded port in the middle. You can use that to connect a cable release, a threaded cable release for things like long exposures and bulb shooting, so you can lock the shutter in place with that. Basically what bulb does while we're here is when you push the shutter button down, the shutter opens. When you release the shutter button, the shutter closes. Over here is the frame count window and a little index to let you know how many frames you've used of your film. Here's the front of the camera, and on the front of the camera we have first up, make and model here. This is your self-timer lever, and your self-timer lever will work in any mode except bulb. You cannot set your shutter speed dial to B and have the self-timer work. Okay. But to activate the self-timer, you simply turn this over to the side. Shutter's currently set to M90, and then whenever you're ready to take a photo, you just press the shutter release. This is your lens mounting flange. This is where we'll mount the lens, and we'll see that a bunch in video too. Lens locking pin to keep the lens in place when it's mounted. Lens release button retracts the locking pin to remove the lens. Lens mounting index, we'll see in video 2 how to use this to properly align your lens. Meter coupling lever right here. This lever rotates around your lens mount, and what it does is it works with the lens to help you meter. So when you are using your camera, you'll notice when the lens is mounted on the camera that the aperture is open. And when you mount the lens on the camera, you can close the aperture but the actual aperture won't close when it's mounted on the camera, just like right now it's not closing because I've got a little lever pressed. I can release it and it closes. Okay, the point of all that is the camera keeps the aperture open at all times when you're not taking a photo so that you can focus very easily with the lens. However, your shutter time will need to be different with different apertures. So what the Nikon FG-20 does is this little part of the lens right here connects with this metering lever, and as you adjust the aperture, it moves this lever so that the camera knows what aperture you've selected. So if you have a 1/1000th of a second and f1.8 for your shutter speed for a perfect exposure, but you actually wanted to use f8, then the camera will know without closing the aperture that you've adjusted the lens to f8, and it can go 1/500th, 2/50th, 1/125th, 1/60th at f8 in that same light and tell you a proper shutter speed with that. So that's what this is for and how it works with your lens. Think we talked about the lens release button? Yes, we did. This is your EV comp button right here, and when you push that, it will overexpose your image by 2 stops, and we'll talk about that in the second video. The back of the camera doesn't have a whole lot to see. Viewfinder eyepiece right here. This is what you'll look through to get your meter readings and to compose your image. This is your film memo holder. After you tear the box top off of the film that you're using, you just slide it on in there, and that'll tell you, unless you're using Santa Color, what film type, speed, and frame count you have loaded. Also, whenever I'm done with a roll of film, I'll take that box top out so that if this is empty, I know that the camera is empty and I can open it safely. Serial number. On the camera's bottom, we have a few things of note. This is the mechanical coupling that works with the motor drive. So if you have the battery-powered Film Advance motor drive, this right here is what interfaces with it so that the gearing from that motor drive can advance your film. This is your film rewind button, tripod socket, made in Japan, battery chamber, and then this is the electronic contact interface for the motor drive. This will tell the motor drive when the camera has taken a photo and when to advance the film. If you don't have a motor drive, don't feel like you need to go out of your way to get one. They're big, they take some number of AA batteries, so they add a lot of weight, and they don't usually, I think they're like 2 or 2.5 frames per second. I don't remember exactly for sure with the FG-20 what options for the motor drives, how fast they are. But it's not buying you a whole lot, really, and it's just not something that's going to make your photography any better in most cases. But if you already have one and it works, there's no reason not to use it if you would like to. We can get inside of the camera by lifting up on the film rewind knob here and opening the back of the camera like that, okay? Here's the film cassette chamber. In video 2, I'll show you how to load film, but it's going to go right here. These 4 silver rails are called film guide rails, and as the film comes out of the cassette, these 4 rails help keep it properly aligned and moving through the camera correctly. The top and bottom ones keep the film from moving outside of where it should be, and then these 2 on the inside, you work with the film pressure plate, which I'll show you in just a minute, to sandwich the film flat in front of the shutter area here so that the film is flat and properly placed to receive focused light from the lens. The shutter opens to give you your exposure time. This is the film take-up sprocket right here. And you can see after I push the shutter button, this will turn to pull the film out of the cassette like that. And we'll see this in a little bit more detail in the second video. But it doesn't pull the film back in unless you push the rewind button, and then it starts spinning freely. Okay. Film take-up spool right here. On the back of the camera door, we have the film pressure plate. This is what sandwiches the film flat. And then we have this cassette retaining spring here, and that keeps the film properly aligned over here in the cassette in the cassette chamber here, so that film exits and then can be rewound onto the cassette properly without jamming in the camera. I do have some tips for you on how to make the most of your Nikon FG-20. The first one is the bulb and M90 on the shutter dial here. These are both mechanical, so you can use those without a battery and they'll be accurate. If you have if you want to do something like an overnight star trails photo, you might want to take the batteries out and then use the bulb mode just to make sure that the camera doesn't somehow drain those batteries overnight. Because bulb mode's mechanical, you can do that. The next thing is that if the shutter is jammed, so let me show you something here with the camera. I'm going to take the batteries out really quickly, even though we're going to discuss this more in video 2. Now with no batteries, if I use M90, you can see the camera works just fine. But I'm going to set it to a ½ second. Any of the mechanical shutter speeds will work for this. And you can see a ½ second does not actually do anything different. It's still working on M90. But let me go over here to A mode. And it's still on M90. That's weird. It's not cooperating today. Okay. Sometimes with the FG-20 and the FG as well, if your camera jams, all you have to do is move it into M90 and it'll finish the shutter sequence. That was what I was hoping to demonstrate. If you do not have batteries in your camera, the camera's light meter will not work, and only the 2 mechanical shutter times will work, bulb and M90. Some things not to do with your camera. Big one is don't store it with the shutter ready to fire. When you're done for the day, always trigger the shutter. And the reason is because there are mechanical components in here, like springs, and you arm the shutter, you ready the shutter to fire, you put tension on those springs. And then when you fire the shutter, all that tension's released. But if you store them with tension on, then they can develop a memory or they can fatigue, which could lead to them having improper shutter timing or potentially breaking, both of which are going to be problematic for your camera's use. Don't touch the shutter that's inside of the camera here, because your finger oils can cause it to get a little bit sticky and not work properly, or worst case, you could push one of those shutter leaves off of its proper track, and then when the shutter's firing, the leaves cross and jam, and that ruins your shutter. And it's much cheaper just to buy a new FG-20 than repair a jammed shutter. The next thing is that behind the lens, we've seen the mirror a couple of times. Don't touch that mirror with your fingers because your finger oils can tarnish that mirror, and that can lead to inaccurate metering as well as challenging use of your focus because you'll have some issues with that mirror. Don't leave your Nikon FG-20 in your car for a few different reasons. Theft is an obvious one. You don't want it to be stolen while you're not looking. The second one is heat. When your car gets really hot in the summer, then the lubricating oils in your lens especially, but also in the camera, will get very thin, and then they flow to places they shouldn't be. And when they get back to the proper viscosity, they are going to be in the wrong place, which can muck up the works. Lenses that have aperture leaf oil have generally experienced high heat and had that oil get onto the leaves. So that's one thing you want to avoid with these. Also, about leaving it in cars, extreme cold, like in the winter, can cause damage to this by having the lubricating oils break down and get really thick and gummy and then not work correctly. Don't store your camera in a plastic bag or box unless you have a good and rechargeable desiccant pack. This is not the kind that comes in like your new winter coat or something. This is a kind that usually comes in a metal case, and you can toss it in the oven when it's discharged to recharge it, and then that will help protect your camera in a plastic bag or box. The reason that's important is that plastic is moisture permeable. Moisture can get in, but it's harder for it to get out. Once it's in, it can get onto your lens elements, which can cause fungus to grow, both on your lens and in your viewfinder. On your camera covering, that same moisture can cause mildew to grow, which isn't enjoyable when you hold your camera up to your nose. Don't let your Nikon FG-20 get wet. It's electronic. Electronics and water don't get along, so keep it dry, don't take it out in the rain. And one last thing, your Nikon FG-20 is a precision tool that should be handled with care and respect, and as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. So that's everything for the first video. Here's a link and a card to the second video, so that if you want to take a look at that and see how to do all the operational aspects of this camera, I'll see you over there.